Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. Feel free to use the chat box for any questions. If we are unable to get to them during the presentation, they will be answered at the end. My name is Maddie Acey, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Today we will be pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation titled, "Can You Afford to Lose All Your Genealogy? Backing It Up." James Tanner has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctor degree in law at Arizona State University. He served for 2 years as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He has previously owned a retail computer business and an Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 32 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy's Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. He has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 33 grandchildren.
Howdy, this is James Tanner, and I'm here at the Brigham Young University Family History Library in Provo, Utah. And this is a ongoing series of webinars. We're holding about 2 or 3 a week, depending on school vacations and semester breaks and things like that may change the schedule. All of these videos are being recorded and they're being put up on the Brigham Young University Family History Library YouTube channel on youtube.com. We're going to talk today about, can you afford to lose all of your genealogy? And it's backing it up. And this really much applies to everything we do on a computer, but we're going to talk about it in the framework of genealogical information. So what could happen? Well, this is a nice picture of the San Francisco earthquake. And here in Provo, I happen to live right on top of the Wasatch Fault. So this is something that could happen. In fact, they've been talking lately about things like this happening. Additionally, there could be storms. Right now, seems like for the last year or so, we've been having a whole series of big storms go through the United States with lightning and tornadoes and winds and floods, and you go on through all the things that could happen. But with computers, it may not have to be quite that dramatic. Anything, a power surge, or just dropping the computer on the ground, or anything like that could happen, could crash. In addition, as we'll talk about here a little bit later in the presentation, there is a engineering term called the mean time to failure. What that means is that any device, and particularly electronic devices, have an average, a mean, which is half fail, half do not fail within a particular period of time. So there's always a lifespan on all computer devices. If you're using an older computer and it's been running just fine for years, for example, you're really living on borrowed time because that machine could crash at any time. And so you need to be very mindful of the fact that the data that you're going to do is vulnerable to all sorts of possibilities out there. The machine could get stolen. It could get fire burned down your house. I mean, there's all these different things. And in that case, the data that you have on your computer could disappear. We need to talk about some definitions here. When we talk about backing up files, what that means is to make 1 or more copies to avoid file loss. Now, that does not mean that you back up the file or that you make a copy on the same computer or hard drive. You actually need to make a backup copy on a separate hard drive from your computer. That means you then have 1 backup. And if both of your computer and the hard drive get stolen, or if they get destroyed, then you're still in the same position that you were without a backup. So you need to think through the possibilities. And the point that we start at, being quite serious about the whole subject, is how much time have you got into the files on your computer And are you willing to redo it all? If you don't think you want to redo everything that's on your computer, then you really need to be careful about backing up and making extra copies of your files so that they don't get lost and you aren't forced into a position of either losing the information entirely or having to redo the work. Now, when is a backup not a backup? Um, there are some programs out there, particularly genealogy programs, that have a file um, selection that says back up this file. And the interesting thing about that is that all it does is make another copy of the same on the same hard drive as selected for your program. So it's not really a backup, because a backup uh, is not a backup when it's made to the same hard disk drive that contains the original information, or the same drive. And today there's coming into a lot of new drives coming out that are solid state memory drives called flash drives, and they don't have moving parts. When we talk about a hard disk drive, we're talking about what's called spinning media. That means there's a little mechanical a motor inside of this little disk that turns a disk made out of metal, and it's used to record the information at very high speed. Okay, so in other words, if you're copying back onto the same disk, simply because you have another copy of that same file really does not provide you any protection at all from loss of the file. If one file goes bad on a computer, it's likely that the other one that's the same will be bad also. There are essentially today three ways to back up files. Um, as you probably recognize, there's technological changes. In the computer world, if we go back, let's say back as far as 20 or 30 years, maybe more, when desktop home computers, they used the term back then personal computers. I don't think you ever hear that anymore. All computers are personal. So we don't worry about that one anymore. But what back then we used, originally what they came out with was 8-inch floppy disks, and those never caught on for home consumption. The first one that was used for personal computers at homes were 5.25, 5.5 inch floppy disks. They were called floppy disks because they were my piece of mylar coated with a magnetic substance, iron oxide, if you want to know what it is, and a mixture of other adhesives, and the information was recorded magnetically on this a 5.5 inch disc. Then we moved to smaller ones that they called floppy disks, and people could never figure that out because they came in a hard plastic case, so they couldn't figure out how they were floppy. But it was the media inside, the recording part of the disc, that was mylar and was floppy. It was the same substance used in the larger, older discs. So these 3.25 inch or 3.5 inch discs, excuse me, 3.5 inch, 5.25, 3.5. Let's get my numbers straight here. The 3.5 inch floppy disks were fairly reliable. They were good ways to do it, but eventually what we got to was hard drives where the disk was a metal disk, so it was no longer floppy. It wasn't made out of mylar, plastic, and those became the standard backup, and they still are, by the way. So we have hard drives as the #1 backup source. Now, the cost of these particular drives have dropped considerably. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. The second thing that's come along recently is what I just mentioned previously, and that is flash drives, or solid state memory drives. They're called a drive because they are analogous to the hard drive. They store information, but there's really nothing in them that moves. So it's not a drive at all. It's just a flash card or a flash piece of silicone with information on it. And the information there is stored in this little container. These are basically becoming more and more inexpensive all the time. As of yet, they do not compete with hard drives on a cost per storage unit basis. They're still fairly expensive ways to back up information. Third one we have today, which has evolved as a result of the pervasive nature of the internet, is that we can also use information stored on what they call the cloud. That's why there's a picture of two little clouds here. Or it's really just all of the external computers that work together to form the internet. So you can basically either use free space from some websites, or you can pay money and get a considerable amount of backup space, plus they may do it automatically and from time to time on your computer. So these are the three different methods today that we have for backing up files, and they all have pluses and minuses. First of all, the compact discs, which I didn't mention in those three, and that's sort of the technology that came in between. We're still buying a lot of movies and I'm sure some music on compact discs or on DVDs, digital video discs. But the compact disc is on its way out. New computers coming out today. I just upgraded one of my computers, actually two of them, and neither of them have uh, CD drives or DVD drives. Uh, if I want to add a DVD drive to one of the two computers, I had to buy an external drive, which I did because I still have a considerable number of things on compact discs. But as the computer technology advances, compact discs will be phased out. So if you've been using compact discs to back up your files, you may wish to recopy that information onto some other media. Big red no. So we're not encouraging people anymore to use compact discs as a storage device. Additionally, I mentioned earlier the failure rate or mean time to failure uh, of the various types of products. And originally people thought that these compact discs were going to last forever. That, basically there's nothing that could damage them. Well, as it turns out, that's not exactly correct, because the discs themselves deteriorate over time and delaminate, meaning they just fall apart. They also are destroyed by ultraviolet light. So if they're left out in the sun, they can lose all of their recordings, all their ability, and they break. Anybody who subscribes to one of the movie services, probably like Netflix or whatever, you realize that every once in a while you get a disc that doesn't work because it's been scratched or dropped or whatever. So they're not indestructible. The drives are becoming a little scarcer at all times. Now, what we have in the genealogical community is something very interesting. We have people who are still involved with old programs that have long been since discontinued. The prime example of this is a program called Personal Ancestral File that was put out by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints back in the 1990s. And that program was completely discontinued, was never upgraded from 2002. So it's now been 14 years since the program was actively distributed by the church. And there are still millions of users out there relying every day on Personal Ancestral File, which is really interesting. Okay, so my education with backing up my files began with what I call the 3-disc saga. In this particular case, I was working on a rather extensive directory. This directory was supposed to have 3,000 people in it. And I had collected the information and put it all together and was ready to finalize the directory. And I had it on my 3.5-inch floppy disk, and I went to put it in the computer, and the disk crashed. It was unreadable. And I went, oh, this is terrible. And then I thought, well, it's certainly a great good fortune that I had this thing backed up on another floppy disk. So I was very, very careful always to back up all my data onto another floppy disk. And so I pulled out my second floppy disk. Well, the reason why this is called a 3-disk saga is going to be pretty obvious, because that disk died. Now here's the story, and this is why this happened. The file itself became corrupted and could not be read. And when I put it on the backup disk, it didn't, the file was bad. And so when I recopied the backup to another backup disk, that disk was still bad. Okay, so then I pulled out my third copy, and of course that's the reason for the 3-disk, because it was bad. So I had to redo the entire directory, all 3,000 people. And from that point on, I began to be rather obsessive about backing up files and having numerous backups. My wife is kind of getting interested in this because because I line up my hard drives on my desk, and I'm always when I'm going through Costco or wherever, and I see a brand new uh, really high capacity storage drive, I'm always grabbing it. She says, well, you already have 4 or 5 of them on your desk. And I say, yeah, but you never can have too many backups. Uh, but when we're doing some other things that I'll talk about as we go along. So this is the mean time between failures. This is that's the full thing, full expression of the engineering measurement. And it means that how reliable any particular hardware product or component is. And it's measured in thousands or even tens of thousands of hours between failure. And just for an example here, a hard disk drive may have a mean time between failures of 300,000 hours. Okay, so how do they know this? Well, they will take a hard disk drive and they'll stack 10 or 15 or 20 of them up, and they'll just run them through, and they'll run a program that reads and writes to the hard drive over and over and over and over again. So they'll just keep running it, and they'll keep copying the same thing on, erasing it, copying it, erasing it, copying it, until the drives start to fail. And what they've found, and if the mean time to between failures was 300,000 hours, then it would be that long before half of those drives had died. So that's what they mean by the mean part. The half are still going and half fail. Now, if yours happens to be in the failure category, it may not last even a small amount of that 300,000 hours. It could have failed in the first hour. So you're really kind of taking a chance if you rely on this measurement of failure, but it's really the only way we know of comparing various types of storage for computers. We come along with another one there. Now there's a second way of measuring it, and it's called the annualized failure rate. That's the estimated probability that a device or a component will fail during a full year of use. It's a relation between the mean time between failures and the hours that the number of devices are run per year. Okay, so if you turn on your hard drive on January 1, and then you turn it off and don't turn it on again until December 31st, the chance it's going to fail is going to be very close to 0. But if you turn it on January 1 and you run it continuously for the entire year, then that gives you a greater window, you might say, of opportunity that the drive will fail. And so the hours that the number of devices run per year is crucial. And there's other factors that a lot of people talk about. One is how often is it turned off and turned on, because there are some people that claim that turning them off and on creates a greater stress in the electronic components and that they will fail more rapidly. Really have not seen any specific rules on that. It's possible that that's true. There are the group of people who are the leave them on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, don't ever turn them off camp. And then there's the turn them off every time you're not using them camp. So it just depends on which camp you're in as to whether or not that works or does not work. Now, here's an example of the mean time between failures, or the annualized failure rate. So the mean time between failure for a hard disk drive would be anywhere from 300,000 up to 1.2 million hours of time. That's an awful long time for a hard drive, and that's those are that's the spread of the differences that you might encounter in a hard drive. The annualized failure rate for a hard drive is 0.73%. That means that there's a 73% chance that your drive may or may not fail. Let's see. Let's go the other way. So the probability that your drive will fail is not 73%, but 0.73%. So look at that carefully. That's 0.7% failure. That's if you had 100 drives, one of them wouldn't even be expected to fail. It would be a very, very small possibility. Okay, so the chance that a hard disk drive is going to fail during the year is very low, but like I said, any kind of destructive act, if it's dropped, if some water spilled on it or other liquid, if there's a flood, a failure, power surge, any of those kinds of things could damage the drive, other than it's simply failure because it was running. Now, what about the failure rate on other media? Surprisingly, the failure rate of CDs is approximately, the time period is approximately 1 year. That's all they're expected to last. They were originally thought to be almost permanent, as I mentioned, but that does not turn out to be the case, and they're not really as reliable as people would like to have. Now, there's a qualification on this. There are some very high-end compact disc-like media and drives that can create archive quality CD-looking type archive discs, and they are claimed to last forever. So what you get is partially here is what you pay for is what you get, and the fact that you can buy CDs cheaply means that you may be able to back things up on more than one CD, and if you keep them in optimal conditions and don't drop them or scratch them or use them for frisbees or let your dog chew on them, then you're probably pretty safe with the CDs. I have some CDs that are much, much older than 1 year that still work. Flash drives. There's a lot of discussion about flash drives initially when they came out about 10 years or so ago, as to the fact that if they got hit wrong, if you dropped it, or if that they would just fail, and that the failure rate was very high and much higher than the hard drives at the time. Well, flash drive technology has evolved. It's now used all over the world in all sorts of very adverse conditions. Most of the cars that you buy today have flash drive memory, flash memory built into them. They're not going to fail. In fact, apparently they haven't been around long enough for any real information to come about that everybody accepts about their failure rate. They are, since there's no moving parts, there's nothing to wear out, and they can simply keep going forever. Now, that doesn't count for what we call obsolescence, technological obsolescence. CDs are still reliable for many circumstances, but they're technologically getting obsolete because they're no longer making CD drives. We happen to be using two computers here to do this webinar, and neither of them have CD drives. So we're not really in a situation where we're supporting that particular media anymore from a technological standpoint. Flash drives, however, are use what are called USB connectors, and I would think that USB connectors are on like every computer that is ever made now. So that's another factor in their reliability is, are they going to become obsolete? Are people going to be still using the devices sometime down the future? I can't tell you how many different types of devices I have sitting in boxes that I cannot read any longer, because not because the device no longer works, but because I don't have a computer or a program that I can plug it into and read. So it's essentially lost. Um, that was really what happened to us with all of my floppy disks. My 3.5-inch floppy disks all went into the trash one week after we figured out we hadn't looked at them for 5 years and there was nothing on them that we wanted to keep. So that was the end of that. Cloud storage is another possibility. That means you connect your computer to the internet and you upload your data to a facility that allows you to store information either for free or for a subscription. Now, pretty much it's pretty much valuable until you stop paying. Um, as far as reliability is concerned, it's as reliable as the storage company is. But many people pay for storage, even if it's a nominal amount like $50 a year or $100 a year or whatever, and they store all their information up on the cloud. They die, the person dies, and the heirs don't know that he has the or she has the account online, and eventually the account is locked up and nobody can access it. So there's other possibilities too. The company that you use for storing your information on the cloud could go broke, and that has happened. And also, some of the largest of these companies have gone down. They've their whole systems have crashed. So this isn't the ultimate solution to anybody's problem, but it is one more way of trying to back up your information. Okay, so let's look at the elements of a backup system. How are we actually going to um, look at the different systems? First of all, it should be automatic or very easily accomplished. If it's a complex task to do the backup and make an extra copy, then you're not going to do it. It doesn't matter how determined you are to back it up, you'll just postpone it, and it'll be days or weeks or months or even years before you back up your data. So if it's automatic, you don't have to worry about it. The computer will just back it up. So my primary computers, both of them right now, in fact, all three of the main computers that we work with at home have automatic backup systems. Every few minutes, as the computer is running, the system kicks on and backs it up. In our case, we're running Macintosh computers, Apple Macintosh computers, and the backup system we have is called Time Machine. It comes from Apple. It's part of the system. You just turn it on and plug in a drive, and it automatically backs everything up on the computer. I have actually used it to restore a crashed main hard disk on my computer, so I know it works, and I'm very happy to let it sit there and do its thing. It has to be cost effective. If it's an expensive way to go, it's possible that you would get in a position where you no longer wanted to pay the amount or couldn't pay the amount, and so you may lose what you have backed up. So it has to be pretty inexpensively paid for. Safe, meaning it can't have the same degree of danger of loss that your main computer has. So if I'm backing it up onto a hard drive in the same room with the same information on the system, and the whole system gets fried by an electrical shock, like a lightning strike, then the hard drive's going to get fried too, and it really won't do you any good. But so a safe one means generally off-site type thing. Long lasting, that'd be helpful. Now we've talked a little bit about the length of time that some of these devices may be uh, may may actually be worth using as a backup. And I guess the summary of all that is that no matter what device you're using, there is always the possibility that it would fail. And so that's why we're going to talk about doing multiple backups um, rather than just using one method to back up. What I think is really tragic from the genealogical standpoint is that somebody puts all their genealogies. It's happened, I don't know how many times I've talked to people where this has happened, where they will put everything they've ever done on a flash drive. And they come in and they say, well, all my genealogy is on this flash drive. And I go, well, that's too bad. The reason why that's bad is because flash drives, although they're very long lasting and relatively stable places to back up information, they're very easily lost. We have drawers full of them here at the library of people who have left them in the machines, and we can't find them. So it's just interesting that that's a very convenient and very seems to be cost-effective way, but it's also very easy to lose. And the main thing is that the backup system doesn't stop simply because you die or become incapacitated. So we need backup systems that will continue even after we die. Now, if you're going to have a backup online that is a commercial backup, then you should make very, very careful plans for not just in your will, but instructions to people on your death and whatever, sort of, if I die, open this envelope and read all the contents kind of thing, um, that tells people what to do and where to go and how to access this information. And they may want to keep the backup going, and so they may want to pay the amount that it costs to keep it going. Okay, so what's the first choice? Where would I first put my data? Well, the first choice I have depends, and that depends on a lot of things. First of all, it depends on how much money you want to spend. Uh, if you have a heart attack, when I say it's going to cost you $29.95 for a program, you're hardly in the position financially where you would want to buy a very expensive hard drive or some other solution. So you've got to do a realistic assessment of what you're willing to spend. And then the question that comes up next is how much information you want to store. If your entire life history and all of your genealogy will fit on one little 128 gigabyte flash drive, then that's great. But if you happen to have gathered as much information as I have, you're into hard drives with terabytes of information, and so that's 1,000 gigabytes of information. And so you want to make sure that that you're buying the drives that will take all the information you need to store. And then the other question is, how dedicated are you? Are you willing to spend time periodically to back up all your data, or are you going to just forget that you did backups for a weeks or 2 weeks or months or whatever? How much time would it take to redo all your work? That's the bottom line. That's what I mentioned a moment ago about thinking about the replacement cost is not just a monetary value, it's the time it would take you to redo all of that genealogical work that you've been doing. So what's the most cost-effective way of looking at hard drives? So what I did was to prepare for this was went online and did some searching on the largest capacity drives I could find in each of the categories, and then so that's what we're doing. We're not looking at so what this means is that if you're buying anything less than the largest drive, it's going to cost you a lot less. So we'll go to that way. First, right now, today, according to this is May, what are we, 11th, 12th? May 12th of 2016, an 8 terabyte hard drive is running about $229.99. So you can order online, or I don't know if they have any in any of the stores at all, but there's plenty of them online for $22.99. $229.99. A 1 terabyte, not an 8 terabyte, a 1 terabyte flash drive is $834.39. But my note here is the smaller flash drives are much cheaper. Well, the gigabyte flash drives are probably under $10, under $5. A 1 gigabyte flash drive you could probably get for less than $5. But by the time you get up to 128 gigabyte flash drive, you are probably into the $20 or $30 range for each flash drive. So if you start looking at the size of the disks and the cost per memory for unit of memory, the spinning hard drives now, the hard drives are still far, far and above the cheapest way to store information. And that's why I said it really depends on the amount of information you're trying to store. An unlimited online storage is about $50 a year per computer. So you're looking at that and you're saying, well, it's cheaper for me I could buy unlimited online storage for about 4 years, more than 4 years, for the cost of one hard drive. That's true. And so you may want to consider it because it's fairly inexpensive, and it's a way to do it. Let me give you an idea of the time it would take. My files right now, I ran a utility program the other day, and I have just above, a little bit above 1.2 million files on my computer. And it is about just under 4 terabytes. So it's just right around 4 terabytes of information. It takes me, if I do a backup even of just 1 or 2 files, not even the whole thing, I have no idea how long that would take. But if I take a 1 terabyte or a 1.5 terabyte file and I plug it in and I copy it over to an external hard drive, it's right now taking somewhere between 2.5 and 3 days of constant computer running to carry that, to copy that information. So when you get into larger amounts of information on your computers, one of the limiting factors is very, very specifically is the size of your files. Now, if your files are very small and you say, oh, well, James, I only have a very small file. My answer is you can put it any place. It really doesn't matter, because if it only takes you a few minutes to back it up, you can back it up on all sorts of things. But once you start to get into larger amounts of information that seem to appear with lots of genealogical research and all the documents and scans and things that you might pick up, then you're really looking at some considerable, even with the fastest connectors today, that time for backing up that much information would still take hours and hours of time of running the computer to back up. So when you're talking about unlimited online storage, think about it, because that depends on the cost of your internet connection. If you are connected to the internet and you're paying amount of money for a certain amount of data transfer, upload and download data transfer, it's not costing you $50 a year. That's what they charge you, what the storage place charges you. But what is it going to cost you for your internet connection? So you have to factor in the cost of uploading and downloading the files that you have there. Now, if you live in Provo, Utah, we're one of the 3 now they're probably getting around close to having 4 or 5. One of the 3 cities in the country that have Google Fiber. With Google Fiber, we get gigabit transfer. It's still taking, if I, for instance, signed up today for unlimited online storage and started transferring the data off of my computer and my backup files, it would still probably take um, a matter of days of sitting there and copying before it would be completed. Just one backup. So that's another very important consideration, where you may say, well, I have nothing, and so then you start looking and adding it up and find out that it really would take quite a while to copy your information. Which is the easiest one to use? Well, that's simple. Automatic storage to a hard drive from either Microsoft or Apple. They both have built-in operating system backup programs that you just hook into a hard drive that is at least as large or larger than your internal hard drive, by the way. You don't want to start out with smaller. And it might be helpful to get it bigger, much bigger, and then just turn on the automatic backup, and every few minutes or so they will back up everything incrementally onto your hard drive. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. Automatic online storage, I would think, would be second. You need to be careful here that your internet connection is maintained. If for any reason you change internet service providers, you may have to go through some difficulty in getting reconnected to your online storage because your address might change. You also have to take into consideration when you're looking at this kind of thing with online storage is whether or not the computer you're using is connected to the internet. A lot of people today use laptop computers. They travel around and they may be relying on Wi-Fi, and many times Wi-Fi does have a upper limit on the amount of storage for cost. For example, if you have a cell phone, um, a smartphone connected to through one of the larger service providers like AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, whoever, then what you're going to find is that your plan may limit you to a certain limit of maybe 2 gigabytes, 4 gigabytes, whatever, of data transfer every month before you start incurring some rather hefty extra charges. Well, that may not be nearly enough to allow you to back up all the data that you have. So looking at backup and storage online can be a lot more complicated than just the cost of the of buying into a subscription service for backing up your data on unlimited or otherwise. Okay, so what are the downsides? Where do you go? Where did things go wrong here? First of all, hard drives can crash without warning. All that stuff that I talked about, mean time between failures and all that, that's just like the weather. The weather report, 50% chance of rain today. I had never figured out if that meant it was going to rain on 50% of the city, or if it was going to rain 50% of the time, or it meant that it may never rain at all because there was only a 50% chance of rain. Well, what we know is that 50% doesn't tell us much about real life, because if it rains, it's 100%, and if it doesn't rain, it's 0%. And all they're saying to you is that there's somewhat of a chance that it's going to rain. Well, that's the same thing when you start talking about the failure rate on any kind of electronic device. The device could stop working any moment. You have no guarantee that it just won't stop. Okay, so that's one downside. Flash drives, I've already mentioned, they get lost. That is a real deal. And I don't know how many times people have come in the library and said, I left my flash drive. Is there some chance that it got? No, the answer is we never see it again. As a matter of fact, what my wife and I have gone to is we have some big plastic material tags. I mean, big, I say they're like 8 inches by 2 inches by 8-inch tags. They have our names on them in great big letters and our phone number. And they're attached to our hard drive, our flash drives. So if we plug in our flash drive In addition to that, I put my name on the flash drive. When it comes up, it tells you who owns it. So it's, I have left them in the library, and I have been called and said, James, would you come down and get your flash drive? So yeah, that works too, but they do get lost. Cloud storage is by subscription. If you stop paying, you lose access. That's just simple. Just listen to the terms. What is happening out there on the internet is that some of the larger internet providers, like Google, Adobe, Microsoft, um, who else? A lot of other providers like that are providing what seems to be a very large amount of storage for free. So Google has, for example, unlimited photo storage up, and you can put up to 1 terabyte of information for free. Well, that's fine. Uh, the question is, what happens if they decide to make it not free? There's really no guarantee that that would be the case. Wouldn't be the case. So how do we get around the hard drives can crash without warning? First, use multiple hard drives. Don't rely on just one external device and say, oh, I've got everything backed up. One of the other things I do is I will put everything that I have on a hard drive, and then I will give that hard drive to one of my children in one other part of the country. So if something happens to my house, or the plate is stolen or whatever, then I have another copy. May not be as current as I want it to be, but at least I could preserve a lot of the data. So using multiple hard drives and putting some of them in different locations. Now, people always come to me and say, well, I have everything in my safety deposit box. Let me tell you about safety deposit boxes. Some of you might, as Maddie mentioned at the beginning, realize that I was an trial attorney for 39 years. I did a lot of probate. I worked in a lot of state cases. One of the worst things that could happen to anybody was to have their will and all their information about their family, their trust or whatever, in a safety deposit box. Because as soon as that person died, the bank would lock it up and say, we can't open it without a court order. So it would force the people to go to court and open a probate, get an administrator, executor, whatever, appointed, simply for the purpose of getting into the safety deposit box. Okay, so I'm not a real fan of safety deposit box, sorry. Don't carry it around. Flash drives, if you're going to use it as a backup, don't use it. Put it on a safe place in your home and leave it there and only come out to do your backup. Don't put it in your purse, your pocket, your briefcase, your whatever, and carry it around and leave it in the library. On cloud storage, if you're going to pay for a cloud storage and you know all of your stuff is backed up there, then make some arrangements. If something happens to you, make sure you have someone who has funds available to continue to make the payment, or that will buy a big hard drive and download everything so it can be preserved, so they can shut off the service or whatever. But make sure that that happens. So the answer here is never depend on just one backup system. Okay, so I've thrown another little flash drive into this little icon show here. The first one's a flash drive, is a hard drive, and then there's a little black square there that's like called an SD drive. And that's really what that is the same thing as a flash drive. It's just been stripped of the big case and the USB connector. But these little SD drives are fairly inexpensive, and you can get holders that let you plug them into your computers. So you can plug it into a plug that plugs into your computer. So yes, they can be used for backup. Flash drives, USB drives, whatever you want to call them, they are, a lot of people call them thumb drives. They are convenient, useful, quite inexpensive, but not large enough to really back up a lot of genealogical files. Cloud, we've already talked about the limitations on the cloud. So what I would suggest is having at least 2 or more of these different storage devices. What I try to do with my cloud storage is put any of the files that I'm actually working on and that would be uh, very, very inconvenient if I lost. So those are all on the internet, but the vast and all my photos and things like that are up online. Uh, but I'm basically using hard drives, flash drives, and other media to back up the rest of it. Now we're going to kind of emphasize obsolete. This old zip drive, the 3.5-inch floppy drives, the CDs, and paper folders. Those are all kind of obsolete type things that will not guarantee that your material gets saved. Now, let's talk for a moment just about people who are into the paper thing. Um, if I have all my files on paper, what are the chances that those files will get preserved? So I say, well, I have everything on paper. I don't need to put anything online. I don't need anything on my computer. I just use my computer to look things up and then I put it all on paper. Well, that's fine, except you better make the arrangements that your paper gets taken care of when you die, because if you die, what happens very frequently, and we find it to be a tragedy, is that the heirs, the people who are inheriting this person's property, the children or whoever, are not as enthusiastic about genealogy as the person who died. So the files all go in the trash. Okay, so that happens very frequently, and it is one of the constant losses of facts of why information is being lost from the genealogical community. So never depend on just one way. I have to absolutely emphasize this. Just try to spread it out over a number of different drives, a number of different formats. If you can afford it, go online, get an online backup. Be sure when you have your computer, even if it's a laptop, that you get a hard drive that is big enough to back up its main hard drive, internal hard drive, and use an automatic backup system like the Apple or Macintosh systems that will back it up automatically. And remember to plug that hard drive in enough times every day or during a day or once a day or something so that it can be backed up automatically. Just save yourself a lot of grief in the long run. And the big question here is, when do we start? And the answer is, you start today. That's when we begin the process of backing up. Absolutely, before the sun goes down, you should start that process. And if you're living someplace and listening to this and the sun has already gone down, it's too late, too bad, goodbye. No, not quite. But basically what you need to do is think through how would be the best way to back up all of your data. Now, if you don't have the technical ability, if you feel like, well, I don't know how to do this, even you've been saying back it up, back it up, back it up, and I don't even know what you're talking about because I have no idea how to back up my data. Basically, all we're talking about is making an extra copy. If you're using a computer today and you're using a Windows program or an Apple Macintosh OS X program or even some other device, then you need to plug that into a hard disk drive and drag your file folders over to the new drive. That's how you back it up. It'll just make a copy of everything. If you need help, ask somebody who knows how to do it to show you how to back up your computer. Do not uh, wait until you have a crash and then try and figure out how to get your data back. To me, it's a real tragedy when I hear about people having to send a hard drive or their computer off to one of these services that will try to get the data off the computer electronically. Uh, so sometimes there's crashed hard drives. They still have to go. They go out onto get online and find these places where you ship them the dead hard drive, and they have some electronic ways of trying to recover some or all of the information. Sometimes they can recover some of the information. Most of the time they can't, and so it matters which way it was destroyed. But watching TV shows to the contrary, uh, there still is not an infallible way of recovering hard drives. Plus, it's quite an expensive procedure to have to do. So it's much cheaper in the long run to be careful and make consistent backups of all of your data. The question of what data to back up is what can I afford to repeat, do over again, or what wouldn't I miss if it were lost today? So now comes the ultimate question. What do you do with all the paper? Okay, so now I've scanned all my files. I've put them all on my hard drive. I've got them all on my computer, and I have paper. The answer to that is you archive any certificates, original documents, books, or other replaceable items. All those should be preserved, period. If it's copies of copies, throw it away. If you have uh, gone to the library and diligently copied down and made photocopies of every page of some book, or photocopied copies of the U.S. Census records going back to 1790 or something like that, the answer to that is those are not irreplaceable items, and the paper is not worth keeping. We can replace them easily. It's not even a problem. The simplest thing to do is, if you have copied all of your paper, put it in backup, is to make arrangements, talk to people, find out who's interested in preserving it, and give it to them before you're incapacitated or before you die. Now, one other little kind of side comment here is, if you haven't put yourself in this position, then you need to be careful that you are aware of what's going to happen to your documents and things. A lot of people will put, like I said, they'll put their instructions in a will. Well, that's just fine, and your will is in the safety deposit box, and by the time they get it out of the safety deposit box, they've thrown everything away. That's the problem. So you need to make sure that all this gets preserved. The idea here is to use good archival practices, good archive practices. And those you can get from the Library of Congress preservation section. If you go to loc.gov, then you can get instructions on all the types of protection that you need for your actual physical paper and other kinds of things that are of historical value. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and I thought I'd end with the volcano just in case you have one coming up in your area and it's going to destroy everything you have. So just one reminder that there's another possibility out there that could happen. Northwestern Arizona right now, sort of north of Hurricane, Utah, and just south of Bunkerville, Nevada, they're having earthquake swarms, and earthquake swarms are one indication of a possible volcanic activity. So if you live in St. George or southern Utah, close to the border with Nevada or in Las Vegas, you might start thinking about backing up your files on the cloud before they have a big earthquake or a volcano. On that note, we'll say goodbye. This is the James Tanner for the BYU Family History Library, Brigham Young University Family History Library in Provo, Utah. Recordings of this and other videos are on, webinar videos are online on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. And we would encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you get notice of all the new videos that are going up regularly. Thanks for watching.